After the maid was fired, her toddler made one phone call. The billionaire fired everyone. Maria Delgado had exactly $40 in her purse and a 4-year-old boy asleep in the backseat of a car that barely started in the cold. 3 hours earlier, she had been escorted out of the biggest house in Greenwich, Connecticut, called a thief in front of people she had served coffee to for 6 years. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just picked up her son's stuffed rabbit from the mudroom floor and walked out the servants' entrance for the last time. What Maria didn't know was that her son had slipped something into his tiny jacket pocket that morning. A business card, with a phone number nobody outside the family was ever supposed to dial. And in less than 24 hours, that one small piece of paper would bring down an entire household. Stick around, because what this little boy does next will leave you speechless. Welcome back to Storysphere. Before we dive in, I want to say thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories. You have no idea how much it means. Quick question before we start. What city or country are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now get comfortable, because today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. It's about a mother who lost everything in one afternoon. A little boy who didn't understand what fired meant. And one phone call that changed the lives of an entire family, forever. Maria Delgado always followed the rules. So when she was accused of breaking the one rule she never broke, nobody believed her. Not even the man who once called her family. Have you ever been punished for something you didn't do? And the worst part wasn't the punishment. It was that nobody even asked for your side of the story. Keep that feeling in mind as you watch what happens to Maria. The Whitfield estate sat at the end of a long gravel driveway in Greenwich, Connecticut, behind iron gates that opened only for cars worth more than most houses in the country. Richard Whitfield had built a financial technology empire from a garage in Austin, Texas. And by the time he was 42, his name appeared on magazine covers, next to words like visionary and self-made. But Richard was rarely home. He was in Singapore closing deals, in Zurich meeting investors, in airports more than he was in his own kitchen. That was where Maria came in. Maria Delgado had worked for the Whitfield household for 6 years, ever since she arrived from Guatemala with nothing but a suitcase and a determination that her son, Matteo, would grow up safe. She started as a part-time housekeeper and worked her way up to head of daily household operations. Not because anyone handed it to her, but because she showed up early, stayed late, and treated every room in that mansion like it was her own. Matteo was 4 years old now. A quiet, curious boy with dark curls and enormous brown eyes, who had practically grown up in the east wing of the estate playing with wooden blocks on the marble floor, while his mother dusted portraits of people he'd never meet. "Mama, why does Mr. Whitfield have so many rooms he never sleeps in?" Matteo had asked her once. Maria had laughed and told him that some people collect houses the way other people collect seashells. Beautiful, but empty most of the time. Richard Whitfield barely knew his own housekeeper's son by name. But there had been a handful of mornings, rare ones, when Richard was between flights, where he'd come down for coffee and find Matteo sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, stacking cereal boxes into towers. Once, just once, Richard had knelt down, ruffled the boy's hair, and said, "Building something big there, buddy." He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, scribbled his direct cell number on the back, a number even his own board members didn't have, and tucked it into Matteo's little jacket pocket as a joke. "For emergencies," Richard had said with a smile, already checking his watch, already halfway out the door. "If the tower ever falls down." Matteo, who couldn't read yet, had kept that card in his jacket for 3 months. Maria never even knew it was there. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in November. Diane Sinclair, the estate manager who oversaw the household staff and answered directly to Richard's chief of staff, called an emergency meeting in the servants' hallway at 7:15 in the morning. Her voice was clipped, controlled, the way it always was right before she delivered bad news to someone who couldn't fight back. A diamond bracelet is missing from Mrs. Whitfield's. Diane corrected herself quickly, since there was no Mrs. Whitfield anymore. Not since the divorce 2 years prior. From the master suite. It was in the safe in the dressing room. Security footage shows the safe was accessed at 9:40 p.m. last night. Only 3 people had the code that day. Maria's stomach dropped before Diane even said her name. Maria Delgado, Thomas Reyes, and myself, Diane continued, her eyes never quite landing on Maria's face. Thomas was off-site with his family in Boston. Confirmed. That leaves 2 names on this list. The hallway went silent. 6 other staff members stood frozen, eyes darting toward the ground, toward the walls, anywhere but at Maria. "I didn't touch that safe," Maria said, her voice steady despite the way her hands had begun to shake. "I was with my son at the doctor's office until 8. Ask the pediatrician's office. Ask anyone. We'll be reviewing everything," Diane said, in the flat tone of someone who had already decided the outcome. "In the meantime, for company policy, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately. Pending investigation." Suspended. Maria felt the word land like a slap. "Diane, I have worked here for 6 years. I have never." "This isn't personal, Maria." Diane's eyes finally met hers, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered there. Something that looked almost like guilt. Gone as quickly as it appeared. "It's protocol." By 9 that morning, Maria was standing in the mudroom with a cardboard box containing 6 years of her life. A spare cardigan. A photo of Matteo's first birthday taped inside her locker. A coffee mug with a chipped handle that nobody else wanted. Matteo stood beside her, confused, clutching his stuffed rabbit, wearing the same little navy jacket he always wore on days he came to work with his mother because daycare was closed. "Mama, are we going home early?" he asked. Maria knelt down, forcing a smile onto a face that felt like it might shatter. "Yes, baby. We're going home early." She didn't tell him she'd just lost her job. She didn't tell him that the accusation of theft would follow her to every future background check, every future interview. She didn't tell him that they had $1,100 in savings, and rent was due in 9 days. She just took his small hand in hers, and walked out through the same door she'd walked through every morning for 6 years. And this time, nobody said goodbye. That night, alone in a cramped apartment with a crying mother and a confused 4-year-old, something happened that would put the entire Whitfield household on notice. What would you do if you were 4 years old, and the only thing you understood was that your mother was crying, and you desperately wanted to fix it? Matteo was about to make a decision no adult in that house would have dared to make. The apartment Maria and Matteo shared was a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a converted duplex in Stamford. 15 minutes from the Whitfield estate, but a world away in every other sense. The radiator clanked. The hallway smelled like someone else's dinner. But it was theirs, and until that morning, it had been enough. Maria sat at the small kitchen table long after Matteo had gone to bed, staring at a calculator on her phone, running numbers that refused to add up no matter how many times she tried. Rent. Matteo's daycare deposit for the following month. The car payment. 6 years of good references meant nothing if the last line on her employment history read, "Terminated. Theft investigation." She put her face in her hands, and for the first time since walking out of that house, she let herself cry. Down the short hallway, Matteo wasn't asleep. He lay in his small bed, listening to the sound of his mother crying through the thin wall, and something in his 4-year-old mind decided that this was a problem, and problems needed to be solved. He thought about the tower of cereal boxes that had once collapsed in the kitchen, and how the nice man with the shiny watch had given him a card and said, "If the tower ever falls down." Matteo didn't fully understand what had happened that day, but he understood that his mama was sad, and that felt like a tower falling down. He climbed out of bed, dug through the small pile of clothes on his chair until he found the navy jacket, and pulled the slightly bent business card from the inside pocket, where it had lived, forgotten, for 3 months. He couldn't read the name on the front, but he recognized the numbers on the back, because his mother had spent the last year teaching him to count using the buttons on the microwave. He carried the card, and Maria's old cell phone, the cracked one she kept in a kitchen drawer as a backup, into the hallway. And with the careful, deliberate concentration of a child completing an important mission, he pressed the numbers, one at a time. It rang twice. "This is Richard." The voice on the other end was sharp, distracted, clearly expecting a business call at 9:40 at night. There was a pause. Then, a small voice. "Hi. It's Matteo." Richard Whitfield, standing in a hotel suite in Chicago with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, and 3 unread emails from his lawyer glowing on his laptop screen, went very still. "Matteo," he said slowly. "The little guy who builds towers." "Yeah." A pause. The sound of small feet shifting on a cold floor. "My mama is crying. She got fired today. Diane said she stealed something, but mama didn't steal anything. I know, because I was with her at the doctor, and then we got ice cream, and then we went home, and she never even went in Mrs. Whitfield's room. She doesn't even like going in there, because it's spooky." Richard sat down slowly on the edge of the hotel bed. "Your mama is Maria. Maria who worked at my house." "Yeah. She's really sad. Mister, can you tell Diane she's wrong? You said if the tower falls down, I could call. My mama's tower fell down." For a long moment, Richard Whitfield, a man who had negotiated 8-figure acquisitions without blinking, didn't know what to say to a 4-year-old on the other end of a cracked phone. "Matteo," he finally said, his voice quieter than it had been in years. "Can you put your mama on the phone for me?" Richard Whitfield had built an empire on due diligence, checking every fact before making a decision. He was about to discover he'd never once applied that same standard to his own household. Have you ever trusted the wrong person, simply because they were the one standing closest to you? That mistake was about to cost Richard Whitfield far more than a diamond bracelet. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button now, because Storiesphere has a lot more waiting for you. And what happens next changes everything. Maria nearly dropped the phone when Matteo appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding it out to her. His small face serious, in the way only a child trying to fix something can be. "Mama, it's the towel man." "The what?" "The man from the towers. He wants to talk to you." Confused and exhausted, Maria took the phone, expecting a wrong number, a scam call, anything but what she actually heard. "Maria. This is Richard Whitfield." The room seemed to tilt. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry. I don't know how my son got this number. Oh." "Maria, stop. I need you to tell me exactly what happened today, from the beginning. And I need the truth. Not what you think I want to hear." She told him everything. The meeting in the hallway at 7:15. The accusation. The box of 6 years packed in 11 minutes. The walk out the servant's door. She told him about the pediatrician's appointment, the receipt still sitting in her purse with a timestamp of 6:52 p.m., an hour before the safe had allegedly been accessed. She told him, her voice cracking, that she had never once in 6 years taken so much as a spare pen from that house. Richard listened without interrupting. And something cold settled into his chest. Not at Maria, but at himself. He had let Diane Sinclair run his household for 4 years with almost no oversight, because she was efficient, because she never bothered him with details, because he was always somewhere else, chasing the next deal. "Maria, I want you to keep that receipt safe. Don't say anything to anyone else about this. Can you be at my office downtown tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I'll send a car." "Mr. Whitfield, I don't want trouble. I just want to understand what happened." "So do I," Richard said. "And I intend to find out." He hung up and immediately called his head of security, a former federal investigator named Gary Osei, who had handled quiet, sensitive matters for the Whitfield family for a decade. I need full security footage for my Greenwich residence. Every camera, going back 72 hours, Richard said. And I need the safe access logs pulled independently. Not through the household system, through the manufacturer directly. That'll take some digging, but I can have preliminary footage by morning, Gary said. Can I ask what this is about? A woman who worked in my house for 6 years just got fired in 11 minutes, based on an accusation nobody bothered to verify, Richard said. I want to know who actually opened that safe. By 2 a.m, Gary called back. His voice was careful. The way people speak when they know the news isn't going to be welcome. Richard, the safe access logs from the manufacturer don't match the household records Diane submitted to your chief of staff. The safe was accessed at 9:40 p.m., that part's accurate. But the household system logged it under a generic staff code that was reset that same week. The manufacturer's independent log shows the access came from a fingerprint scan. Whose fingerprint? There was a pause. Diane Sinclair's. Richard closed his eyes. There's more, Gary continued. I pulled financial records on staff members with safe access, standard procedure when something like this comes up. Diane has been making minimum payments on nearly $90,000 in credit card debt for the last 8 months. Payments started slipping right around the time her ex-husband stopped sending support checks for their 2 kids. The picture was assembling itself with sickening clarity. Diane hadn't investigated a theft. Diane had committed one, and then built the fastest, most convenient story to cover herself, pointing at the 2 people who happened to have safe access that week, knowing full well that one of them, Thomas, had an airtight alibi in Boston. Which left exactly one name standing alone. She didn't just steal from me, Richard said quietly. She destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect herself. And I let her do it, because I was too busy to check. The next morning, Richard Whitfield walked into his own estate for the first time in 6 weeks. Not for a meeting. Not for a deal. But to face the people who had let a mother and her son be thrown out over a lie. What do you do when you discover that the people you trusted most weren't protecting your house? They were protecting themselves, at someone else's expense. Richard was about to find out exactly how deep it went. Maria arrived at Richard's downtown office at 9 sharp, Matteo's hand tucked in hers, because there had been nowhere else to leave him. She half expected security to turn her away. Instead, an assistant led her straight into a glass-walled conference room, where Richard Whitfield stood waiting, still in the same rumpled shirt from his overnight flight back from Chicago. Mrs. Delgado, thank you for coming. He knelt down slightly to Matteo's level. And thank you, Matteo. Your tower call might be the most important phone call anyone's made in my company this year. Matteo just stared at him solemnly and said, Did you fix Mama's tower? I'm working on it, buddy. I promise. Richard laid out everything he'd learned overnight. The fingerprint logs. The falsified household report. Diane's financial troubles. Maria sat frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, as 6 years of quiet dignity finally cracked into something closer to disbelief. She looked me in the eye, Maria whispered. She let everyone in that hallway think I was a thief. I know, Richard said. And I'm not going to pretend an apology fixes that. But I'm going to fix what I can. At 11 that morning, Richard walked through the front doors of his own Greenwich estate for the first time in 6 weeks, Gary beside him with a folder of evidence, and called an all-staff meeting in the same hallway where Maria had been fired the day before. Diane Sinclair arrived expecting to brief him on quarterly household budgets. Instead, she found her employer standing with his arms crossed, and an expression she had never once seen on his face. Diane, walk me through what happened with the bracelet yesterday. She recited the same clipped story she told the staff. The safe. The 3 access codes. The process of elimination. That's interesting, Richard said, Because the safe manufacturer's independent log, the one that can't be edited by anyone inside this house, shows a fingerprint access at 9:40 p.m. Not a code. A fingerprint. Would you like to guess whose fingerprint it was? The color drained from Diane's face. I can explain. You accused an innocent woman of theft to protect yourself, Richard said, his voice low and controlled, in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. You let her walk out of this house in front of her son, with a box, and a reputation you knew was a lie. Do you understand what you did to her? Diane's composure cracked. Richard, I have 2 kids. I was drowning. I made a mistake. One mistake, and I panicked. Maria worked for this family for 6 years without a single complaint. And the moment something went wrong, you sacrificed her in 11 minutes without a second thought. That's not panic. That's calculation. He turned to the rest of the staff gathered in the hallway. The same faces that had stood silently the day before, while Maria was walked out. I also want to know why 6 people stood in this hallway yesterday and watched an innocent woman get fired, without a single person speaking up for her. Without a single person calling me. Nobody answered. A young staff member named Priya finally broke the silence, her voice shaking. Diane told us if anyone questioned the investigation, we'd be seen as obstructing it. We were scared for our own jobs, Mr. Whitfield. I'm sorry. We should have said something. Richard looked around the hallway slowly, at the fear that had apparently governed his own house for years, while he was somewhere else entirely, closing deals, building an empire, trusting a system he never once bothered to check. Diane, you're terminated, effective immediately. And I'll be speaking with legal about what else this involves. Anyone who actively helped falsify records will be terminated as well. Anyone who stayed silent out of fear, I understand it. But this house is going to run differently from today forward. By that afternoon, 3 more names had been added to the list. A household accountant who had helped Diane quietly reroute expense reports to cover the gaps in her spending, and 2 staff members who had known about the fingerprint scan and said nothing when questioned. In total, Richard fired 5 people that day, upending a household structure that had gone unchecked for years. Justice had been served. But Richard Whitfield knew that firing 5 people would never be enough to undo what one 4-year-old boy had to fix with a single phone call. What does it actually take to make things right, after someone's life has been torn apart by a lie? Richard was about to find out that the answer was bigger than he expected. And so was the boy who started it all. That evening, Richard didn't go back to his office. Instead, he actually drove himself, without a driver, for the first time in years, to the small duplex in Stamford, where Maria and Matteo were sitting at their kitchen table eating grilled cheese sandwiches, because it was the only thing Maria had energy to make. He knocked on the door himself. Mr. Whitfield. Maria opened the door, stunned. Is everything fine? Better than fine, actually. Can I come in for a minute? He sat at their small kitchen table, in a kitchen that could have fit inside one bathroom of his Greenwich estate, and he told Maria everything. Diane's termination. The falsified records. The 3 others let go. He told her the pediatric Ian receipt had matched perfectly with the timestamps, confirming what she'd said from the very beginning. I owe you more than an apology, Richard said. I owe you 6 years of trust that I should have shown from the beginning. And I'm sorry it took my 4-year-old, your 4-year-old, to make me pay attention. Matteo, sitting cross-legged on a kitchen chair with cheese still on his chin, looked immensely proud of himself. I fixed the tower, he announced, to no one in particular. Richard laughed. A real laugh. Tired but genuine. You did, buddy. You really did. He turned back to Maria. I'd like to offer you your position back. But I want to do more than that. I'm restructuring how the household operates entirely, and I need someone I actually trust running it. Not just managing schedules, but overseeing the whole staff, reporting directly to me. It's a significant raise, full benefits, and it comes with an apartment on the property if you want it. So Matteo doesn't have to be shuffled around during your shifts. Maria's eyes filled with tears for the second time in 2 days. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. "Mr. Whitfield, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. And please, call me Richard." Over the following months, the Whitfield estate changed in ways that went beyond who was on the payroll. Richard began coming home more often, not out of guilt, though there was plenty of that, but because he'd realized somewhere in that hallway confrontation with Diane that he'd built an entire empire while barely knowing the people who kept his own house running, including the small boy who had once stacked cereal boxes on his kitchen floor. He started having breakfast at home twice a week. He learned Matteo's favorite cartoon. He learned that Maria made the best pupuses he'd ever tasted. He learned that the quiet dignity Maria carried through 6 years of being nearly invisible to the people she served was worth more than any board member's approval. Diane Sinclair, for her part, faced legal consequences for the falsified records and financial fraud, though Richard, after long consideration, chose not to pursue the maximum penalty, understanding, without excusing, the desperation that had driven her there. It didn't undo what she'd done to Maria, but it reminded him that people rarely become villains overnight. They erode slowly. Under pressure, nobody bothers to notice until it's too late. A year later, Maria stood in the same hallway where she'd once been fired in 11 minutes. Now the head of household operations, training 2 new staff members on the same values she'd carried in quietly for 6 years. The same values nobody had bothered to protect, until a 4-year-old with a business card in his jacket pocket decided that when a tower falls down, you don't just watch it happen. You make the call. Matteo is 5 now. He still doesn't fully understand what he did that night, dialing numbers on a cracked phone in a cold hallway. To him, it was simple. His mama was sad, and a nice man once told him to call if the tower fell down. But to Maria, and eventually to Richard, it became something much bigger. A reminder that the truth doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from the smallest, most unexpected place. From someone too young to understand consequences, but old enough to understand love. Richard Whitfield learned that trust without verification isn't kindness. It's negligence. And it can cost someone everything, while you're too busy to notice. Maria learned that speaking the truth, even when nobody in the room believes you, is never wasted. And somewhere in a house that once ran on fear and silence, a little boy learned the simplest lesson of all. When someone you love is hurting, you don't wait for a grown-up to fix it. Sometimes, you pick up the phone yourself. If this story touched you the way it touched me while writing it, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Maria and Matteo's. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to Storisphere, because we've got so many more stories just like this one coming your way. And I'd love to know, what would you have done in Maria's shoes? And what do you think about the Tower Man keeping his promise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way to the surface, go ahead and share this video with them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, right here on Storisphere.